In the glittering ballroom of the Lancaster Grand, where crystal chandeliers scattered golden firelight across polished marble floors, the air was thick with perfume, money, and expectation. Every guest had arrived dressed not merely in gowns and tuxedos, but in strategies and ambitions. To be seen here was to declare one's place in the unspoken hierarchy of the city, and to be ignored was worse than being forgotten. Yet among all the jewels and silk, one figure stood apart: Evelyn Lancaster, the daughter of the man whose name adorned the gala itself. She lingered by a pillar of white stone veined with gray, her figure half swallowed by the shadows. At 24, her youth should have been a beacon, but the scar that carved its way down the right side of her face made the crowd avert their eyes. 7 years earlier, she had been the city's brightest star, the prodigy ballerina who could command a stage with grace and fire. Now she was a silent reminder of a tragedy her father had tried to bury, present at his gala like an echo of shame he could not erase. When Nathan Carter passed her corner balancing a silver tray of champagne flutes, his gaze lingered for a fraction longer than protocol allowed. At 36, Nathan had grown used to invisibility. As a waiter, as a widower, as a single father quietly surviving one day to the next, his life had taught him to move without drawing notice. His broad shoulders, strong hands, and steady step made him seem a man born for more than service. Yet necessity had taught him humility. Still, even in his practiced discretion, he noticed Evelyn, not because she was a Lancaster, but because she looked like someone drowning in silence. The orchestra played a polished tune in the background, lively enough to keep conversation flowing, yet restrained enough not to dominate. The guests moved across the ballroom floor like pieces on a chessboard, each conversation a negotiation, each smile a transaction. Henry Lancaster, the host and patriarch, commanded the room from its very center. At 58, the silver in his hair only made him look more formidable, his eyes as cold as the steel that had built his empire. Every gesture was measured, every word calibrated, every glance weighted. He was a man who had never been denied, and he carried himself like one who expected the world to stay obedient. His gaze swept the room, cataloging allies and enemies alike. When it slid over his daughter, there was no pause, no flicker of recognition, just dismissal, as if she were a chair, a lamp, a piece of scenery unworthy of his notice. Evelyn felt the sting of it, though she had grown accustomed to his silent rejection. To the crowd, she was not the Lancaster heiress. She was a tragedy on display, the scarred girl who once danced and now stood still. Nathan carried his tray between clusters of power brokers and glittering spouses. He caught snippets of conversation, mergers, investments, rumors of political deals. But while others heard only opportunity, Nathan heard loneliness in the margins, fear in the pauses, hunger behind the laughter. His own life had sharpened his awareness. He saw the COO, Serena Blake, orchestrating the gala like a general leading troops, her tablet glued to her hand. He saw Dante Cooper, the PR head, smiling too wide as though selling himself with every word. He saw Vivian Moore, influencer and opportunist, live streaming glimpses of luxury to a faceless audience desperate for envy. Yet his eyes kept returning to Evelyn. Her hand trembled faintly as she reached for her untouched glass. She shifted against the marble as guests passed too close, trying to fold herself into the stone. Her midnight blue gown, flowing from throat to floor, was chosen not to dazzle but to shield. Her golden hair was drawn low at her neck, a quiet attempt at elegance, though her expression betrayed exhaustion from years of whispers. Every scar on her face was a story no one wanted to hear. In Nathan's jacket pocket rested a small music box. Once, long ago, it had been a gift from his wife Amanda. Sometimes it played a few stray notes as though haunted by memory, the melody of love, of loss, of dreams deferred. Tonight, with the music rising and falling around him, Nathan felt the weight of it more than ever. Henry Lancaster mounted the stage to thunderous applause. Cameras flashed as he announced the evening's charitable initiative, his words practiced, his posture flawless. Every pledge signed was another performance of power, another proof of control. The crowd clapped on cue, their enthusiasm perfectly proportioned to their proximity to influence. And still, Evelyn remained in her corner, unseen yet painfully visible. To the guests, she was the Lancaster princess ruined by fire, the dancer who would never dance again, the daughter who had become her father's shame. A beautiful tragedy to be whispered about but never embraced. 7 years earlier, the Riverside Theater had been alive with anticipation. Every velvet seat was filled, the chandeliers blazing, the orchestra tuning with nervous precision. It was opening night for the Youth Ballet Company's season, and Evelyn Lancaster was the star everyone had come to see. Her name gleamed across posters in the lobby. Her face had adorned magazine spreads, and whispers of a future on the world's greatest stages had already begun to circulate. She was only 17 then, but already moving with a mastery that made critics speak of her as a miracle, a prodigy destined for immortality through dance. The stage had been transformed into an enchanted forest, painted trees waiting for the play of lights to awaken them into glimmering kingdoms. In her dressing room, Evelyn had pinned her golden hair into a crown of braids, her costume shimmering with sequins that caught every flicker of light. She was adjusting the ribbons on her slippers when she smelled the faintest trace of smoke. At first, she thought it was nerves. The building was old, the wiring temperamental, but the haze crept in under the door, curling like a warning no one wanted to heed. Above the stage, in the lighting rig, years of neglected wiring sparked into flame. Corbin Hayes, the stage engineer, had warned them 3 times. He had sent memos about the failing system, begged for replacements, pleaded for repairs. But Lancaster Holdings, the company that owned the theater, had decided budget cuts mattered more than safety. The reports were buried beneath profits and deadlines. Tonight, those decisions roared to life in an inferno. The sprinklers that should have hissed to life never did. Maintenance had been left half done. Invoices signed off without the work ever completed. Emergency exits were blocked with set pieces to make backstage neater for photographers. Shortcuts, every one of them, stacked like dry tinder waiting for a spark. And when that spark came, the fire dropped from the rafters like judgment from the heavens. Evelyn rushed to help a younger dancer tangled in her costume when the burning backdrop collapsed. Flames cascaded downward in sheets of molten fabric, the synthetic material fusing with flesh in cruel intimacy. Pain flared across her body, merciless, searing, eternal. The right side of her face bore the worst, the flames etching scars from temple to jaw. Her hands, those delicate instruments of grace, blistered as she tried to shield herself. She remembered the smell before she remembered the pain. Smoke, chemicals, burning fabric, and the bitter scent of her own hair. Then merciful darkness. At the hospital, doctors fought to stabilize her. Infection, shock, and blood loss threatened her life, but she clung to survival. When Henry Lancaster arrived, it was not with tears but with lawyers. While Evelyn drifted in sedation, tubes and machines breathing for her, he crafted a narrative. To the press, it became a tragic accident, unforeseeable and blameless. The family requested privacy. The insurance would handle the medical costs. Behind the curtain of grief, Henry erased evidence, paid inspectors, silenced reports. His signature had authorized every cut that turned Riverside into a death trap, and he would make sure the world never learned it. For Evelyn, the world stopped. The girl who had once flown across stages was grounded in an instant, her wings scorched away. When she returned home, mirrors were covered, cameras avoided her. Invitations dried up. Her friends, the ones who had praised her brilliance, stopped calling, unsure of what to say. In time, she learned to hide, to exist in the periphery of her father's empire, a ghost haunting her own life. Nathan Carter knew nothing of this tragedy as he moved through the Lancaster Gala 7 years later. But pain has its own language, and he recognized it in Evelyn's posture. The way her shoulders curled inward as though protecting something fragile, the way her fingers trembled around a glass she never lifted to her lips. He had seen that same trembling in Amanda, his late wife, when the cancer treatments drained her strength. Amanda had been his anchor, his audience, his love. Together they had dreamed of a future filled with music, tours across Europe, recordings, stages filled with applause. But when illness came, Nathan laid those dreams aside. He learned to braid their daughter Lily's hair, to pack lunches, to balance bills, to hold hands through pain. When Amanda died, Nathan found himself standing at the edge of grief with a 7-year-old who still needed him to be both mother and father. He played piano in hotel bars when he could, served champagne when he had to, every note and every tray carrying the weight of promises unfulfilled. And yet, as he walked the glittering ballroom carrying glasses for people who had never known sacrifice, his eyes caught on Evelyn. Something about her silence called to him. She was not the celebrated heiress they all whispered about. She was someone broken, someone surviving, someone who had endured fire and still stood. Nathan did not know her story, but he recognized the shadow of pain because he carried his own. In that moment, the worlds of two survivors moved closer. She scarred by fire, he scarred by loss. Neither had chosen their scars, but both bore them every day. Neither yet knew that before the night ended, music would awaken what life had tried to silence, and a dance would set truths free that had been buried for 7 long years. The Lancaster Gala moved forward with its calculated rhythm. The band, conducted by Finn Morgan, played cheerful arrangements designed to keep the conversations lively but safe. Nothing too somber, nothing that might disrupt the steady current of small talk and networking. Finn, once a classically trained conductor with ambitions of opera houses and concert halls, now lived within the narrow boundaries of wedding receptions and charity galas. Tonight was no different, except for the shadow that lingered at the edge of the room, where Evelyn Lancaster stood like a statue carved in sorrow. Guests noticed her, of course. They always did. They whispered behind jeweled fingers and tilted glasses, the way children whisper about ghosts in the dark. "She used to be beautiful," one voice murmured too loudly. "Such a shame about the fire." Another leaned in, eyes glinting with cruel curiosity. "I heard she never leaves the house. Why would her father drag her here?" Their whispers trailed after her like shadows she could never escape. Vivian Moore, the influencer with an audience that devoured luxury and scandal in equal measure, knew opportunity when she saw it. She lifted her phone, live streaming snippets of the gala, the gowns, the laughter, the gleam of wealth. She did not frame Evelyn directly, but she was careful to let the scarred daughter drift into the background of her shots. Tragedy in the corner of beauty. That contrast would drive engagement, she knew. And Vivian never wasted content. At the center of the room, Henry Lancaster rose to address his guests. His voice was smooth, deep, commanding, polished by years of boardrooms and speeches. He spoke of generosity, of the importance of giving, of Lancaster Holdings' commitment to excellence. Every word was rehearsed, every pause orchestrated. Cameras flashed. Applause echoed on cue, but then Henry's eyes flickered toward the far wall where Evelyn lingered half in shadow and something shifted. "Beauty," he said, his tone sharpening, "is more than what we see on the surface, yet we live in a world that demands perfection." His gaze swept the room, pausing just long enough to make his meaning clear. "Lancaster Holdings has always stood for the highest standards. We cannot accept anything less." The words struck like stones cast across water, ripples spreading through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking to the young woman whose very existence seemed to contradict her father's creed. Evelyn's grip on her champagne glass tightened. Her knuckles whitened. She had endured whispers, endured pity, endured silence. But her father's voice, measured, cold, dismissive, cut through every layer of armor she had built. Nathan was crossing the ballroom with his tray when he saw her hand tremble. The glass wavered, threatening to spill. Without hesitation, he changed course. He knew he should not. A waiter had no business drawing attention to himself, no business breaking the invisible wall between servant and guest. But instinct outweighed protocol. He had seen too many moments where silence destroyed someone. Not tonight, not her. At the stage, Finn Morgan shuffled his sheets of music, preparing the next song. Serena Blake, the COO who ran the gala with military precision, hovered at his side, her tablet in hand, scanning each selection. But amid the neatly typed playlists, a handwritten arrangement appeared, slipped in by someone unknown. Finn frowned. The melody was familiar, achingly so. His breath caught when he recognized it. It was from the Riverside Theater, the very waltz that had played when the fire consumed Evelyn's future. His first instinct was to stop, to tear the page away, to bury the music again, but his fingers trembled, and when Serena saw the title, the color drained from her face. Still, she said nothing. Some truths, once uncovered, refused to be buried again. The first notes rang out across the ballroom, haunting, fragile, yet filled with weight. Evelyn's head snapped up. Her breath caught as memory collided with present. The glass in her hand slipped, catching the light as it fell, shattering against marble. Conversation stopped. The ballroom stilled. Nathan set his tray aside, his decision as natural as breathing. He stepped forward through the hush and extended his hand to Evelyn. The scarred daughter of the Empire and the invisible waiter met in a silence broken only by music. It was unthinkable. A breach of every protocol. The audience of 300 watched in disbelief. Dresses rustled. Whispers spread like wildfire. Phones lifted in trembling hands to capture the audacity of the moment. A servant offering his hand to the heiress under the gaze of her father. Evelyn stared at Nathan's outstretched palm. Her instinct screamed to refuse, to vanish, to fold herself into shadows until she was unseen. But Nathan's eyes were steady, warm brown, unwavering, without pity. He did not flinch at her scars, did not glance away. He saw her, not as a spectacle, not as a shame. As a woman, she shook her head, the refusal automatic, carved by years of hiding. And then, from the corner of her eye, movement. At the service entrance, a small figure peeked around the door. Lily Carter, 7 years old, her dark hair in braids, her smile bright enough to pierce the tension. She waved at Evelyn, her little hand flapping with innocent encouragement. The sight stole Evelyn's breath. The child's smile carried no calculation, no cruelty, no judgment. Only pure faith that the woman in the blue dress could step into the light. For the first time in 7 years, Evelyn wanted to believe it. She set down the shards of her broken glass, her hand trembling as she reached forward. Nathan's fingers closed around hers, warm and firm. He guided her gently, leading her away from the pillar and toward the center of the ballroom. The crowd parted in shock, like water splitting before them. Whispers rose, cameras flashed, hearts quickened, and under the weight of 1,000 stares, Evelyn Lancaster stepped into the center of the room. The dance had begun. The music swelled, haunting and familiar. The very melody Evelyn had once danced to before fire consumed her world. Now it returned, not as a ghost to torment her, but as a challenge. The ballroom's golden light fell on her scarred face as she stood in the circle of Nathan's hand, his palm warm against her trembling fingers. For the first time in 7 years, Evelyn was in the center of attention, no longer hidden in corners or veiled by whispers. Nathan placed his other hand gently at her waist, steady but not controlling. He bent slightly, his voice meant only for her. "You can dance," he whispered. "Not as who you were, as who you are." The words struck her like oxygen to a suffocating flame. For years she had defined herself by what she had lost, her career, her beauty, her father's pride. But Nathan wasn't asking her to reclaim the past. He was inviting her to step forward, scars and all, into something new. The first steps were halting. Evelyn's legs felt like stone, her muscles stiff from years of disuse. Panic flashed in her eyes. But Nathan guided her with subtle grace, each step a question, each pause an offering. He did not drag her forward. He walked beside her, creating space for her body to remember what her soul had never forgotten. And slowly, it returned. The rhythm, the turn, the flow of movement. Her spine lengthened, her arms curved with growing confidence. The years of silence cracked, and through the fractures poured something luminous. She was not flawless, but she was alive. Not perfect, but radiant. The crowd could not look away. They had expected pity, maybe spectacle. Instead, they saw a resurrection. Whispers faltered into silence as Evelyn's movements grew surer, her presence undeniable. For a moment, she was no longer the scarred daughter, no longer her father's shame. She was a dancer. At the edge of the stage, Henry Lancaster froze, his face drained of color as he recognized the tune, the forbidden waltz he had buried with threats and bribes, the very melody that had echoed through the Riverside Theater as flames consumed his daughter's future. He had destroyed every recording, shredded every sheet of music. Yet here it was, filling his ballroom, carrying his daughter like a tide toward freedom. "Stop this," he hissed under his breath. But the music did not stop. Neither did Evelyn. Dante Cooper, the PR head, leaned toward him urgently. "Sir, people are recording. This is streaming live. Vivian Moore's feed already has tens of thousands watching. If you intervene..." But Henry was already striding forward, fury boiling in his veins. His empire was built on control, and control was slipping through his fingers. Every step his daughter took unraveled 7 years of careful concealment. Nathan spun Evelyn gracefully, keeping his body between her and her father's approach. It was a maneuver both protective and defiant, the kind of quiet rebellion that spoke louder than any words. Henry's hand twitched toward Nathan's shoulder, but Nathan flowed into another turn, sidestepping with the fluidity of water. It was devastating, elegant and undeniable, an employee evading the master with grace instead of confrontation. The ballroom erupted in murmurs. Some gasped in horror at the breach of social order. Others leaned forward in awe, captivated by the unfolding rebellion. A few dabbed their eyes, tears slipping free as they recognized something deeper than scandal. They saw survival transformed into art. Henry snatched a microphone from the podium, his voice cracking through the speakers. "Enough!" he roared. "This is inappropriate. You," he pointed at Nathan, his hand shaking with fury. "You are an employee. You have no right to touch my daughter." The music wavered for a moment, the musicians startled, but Evelyn did not release Nathan's hand. She turned, facing her father with a calm born not of peace but of exhaustion. Her voice when it came was steady and clear, echoing across the ballroom. "I am tired of asking permission to exist," she said. "I am tired of hiding so you don't have to see the cost of your choices. I am not your shame." The word struck the room like lightning. Phones lifted higher, capturing every second. Vivian's stream count doubled, comments flooding in from viewers who had no context but instinctively recognized truth breaking free. Henry's composure cracked. His face flushed red, veins bulging at his temples. Rage consumed reason, and with it his mask slipped. "That scarred face is an embarrassment," he shouted, forgetting the microphone in his hand, forgetting the eyes of hundreds of witnesses. His voice echoed with venom. "Every time I look at you, I see my failure. The failure of that theater, of the safety protocols I signed off on. I've spent 7 years and millions burying it, and you insist on parading it on your face for the world to see." Silence fell like a blade. Even the orchestra faltered, bows frozen mid-stroke. For a moment, the room seemed to stop breathing. Henry's words hung in the air, poisonous and irreversible. Then movement stirred at the service entrance. A man stepped forward, older, weary, but resolute. Corbin Hayes, the stage engineer, clutching a battered folder thick with documents. His voice carried with the weight of truth long suppressed. "I have the reports," he said, his tone steady. "Every warning, every signature, every cut you approved that turned that theater into a coffin." Gasps rippled across the room. Phones swiveled. The tide had shifted. Henry Lancaster's empire was no longer untouchable. His daughter stood before him, scarred but unbroken, and the truth he had buried was rising like fire through dry wood. And still, Evelyn danced. The ballroom dissolved into chaos. Whispers rose into gasps, gasps into shouts until the Lancaster Gala no longer resembled a celebration but a tribunal. Phones recorded from every angle, their red lights like 100 unblinking eyes capturing the downfall of a man who had built his empire on appearances. Henry Lancaster stood at the center of it all, face flushed, jaw tight, eyes darting like a cornered animal. He opened his mouth to retake control, to twist words into weapons as he had done his entire life. But the sound was drowned by Corbin Hayes. The stage engineer stepped fully into the light, his battered folder clutched to his chest. His clothes were simple, his presence unpolished compared to the glittering crowd, but his voice carried authority born from truth withheld too long. "These are the documents," he said, opening the folder and pulling out sheets stained with age. "Emails, reports, signatures. Every warning I gave, every rejection. And everyone bears your authorization, Henry Lancaster. You cut corners. You ignored safety. You signed the death warrant for that theater. And your daughter paid the price." The crowd erupted again. Serena Blake's face drained of color. She had known pieces, fragments whispered in back corridors, but hearing it spoken aloud, seeing the papers with Henry's signature, made denial impossible. Dante Cooper typed furiously on his phone, desperate to draft a narrative that might salvage something, but his screen filled with notifications. Media outlets already picking up the live stream, hashtags exploding across platforms. The story had slipped beyond his grasp. Evelyn stood in the center of the storm, her hand still in Nathan's. She trembled, but she did not retreat. For 7 years she had been silent, buried under her father's version of events. Tonight the music, the dance, the courage of a waiter, and the innocence of a child had cracked her silence open. She would not be buried again. "Enough of this," Henry snarled, stepping forward, the microphone in his hand squealing with feedback. "This man," he jabbed a finger at Nathan, "is nothing. A servant. He staged this entire spectacle to humiliate me, to profit from my family's tragedy." Nathan's voice rose calm and steady, not loud, but carrying. I didn't stage anything, but I know pain when I see it, and I know lies when I hear them. That night, the sprinklers failed because they were never repaired. The exits were blocked because your budgets demanded appearances over safety. You chose profit over people, and your daughter bears the scars. A hush fell again. The words were not dramatic. They were simple, direct, undeniable. Nathan was not a man of power, not a man of influence, but in that moment he was the only one speaking truth without armor. Henry's mask cracked further. Desperation seeped into his eyes. He turned toward the guests, toward the cameras. "You know me," he pleaded. "You know what I've built. Don't let one—" His voice faltered, his gaze flicking toward Evelyn. "One mistake define everything." But the guests were shifting. Some looked at him with disgust, others with fear, still others with the cold calculation of investors watching a stock plummet. Lancaster Holdings was no longer a fortress. It was a sinking ship, and no one wanted to drown with its captain. In the corner, Vivian Moore's phone buzzed nonstop with comments flooding her live feed. He admitted it. "She's a hero. Cancel Lancaster." The story had already escaped the ballroom, racing into the veins of the internet where it could never be recalled. Evelyn stepped forward, her chin lifting. Her voice cut through the murmurs, clear and unwavering. "For 7 years you told the world I was fragile. You hid me. You told me to be grateful for survival while you turned my scars into your shame. But I am not broken. I am not fragile. And I am not your mistake to cover." Applause burst from the edges of the crowd, tentative at first, then building. A few stood, then more. The sound rose like a tide, a wave that washed over the ballroom. Henry's face contorted, fury and humiliation twisting into something smaller, something almost pitiful. He raised his voice again, but now it cracked. "You don't understand," but he was interrupted by the sharp crack of Serena Blake's heels on marble. She stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. "I've seen the reports," she said, her voice measured. "I've signed off on budgets without asking enough questions. That ends tonight. Effective immediately, Lancaster Holdings will undergo a full independent audit of every property, every theater, every building we own. No more silence." It was both a confession and a public severing. Serena was aligning herself not with Henry, but with survival. Others would follow. Henry staggered back, his microphone slipping from his hand, the thud echoing across the room. He looked at Evelyn then, really looked as though seeing her for the first time not as a blemish but as a mirror. And what he saw reflected was everything he had tried to bury: failure, guilt, and the truth that no empire could silence. But Evelyn did not flinch beneath his gaze. She turned back to Nathan, to the music still weaving through the air, to the dance that had carried her from shadow into light. Nathan nodded once and they moved again, steps guided not by fear but by defiance. The orchestra, caught in the current of the moment, played with a passion they had long forgotten. Finn Morgan's hands shook as he raised his baton, but the sound that poured forth was alive, raw, uncontainable. Musicians who had once played only for paychecks now played for truth, for justice, for her, and Evelyn danced. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but with a fire born of survival. Each movement declared what her father's empire had tried to erase, that scars did not end stories. They began them. Henry Lancaster stood alone, the storm of voices crashing around him. His empire crumbled in the eyes of the world, and he could do nothing to stop it. Evelyn had taken back her story, and in doing so she had shattered his. The ballroom was no longer a stage for celebration. It had become a battlefield where truth and lies clashed beneath the chandeliers. Henry Lancaster, once untouchable, stood diminished in the harsh glare of phones and cameras. His voice, once a weapon that commanded boardrooms, now faltered, stripped of its power. He tried to speak, but the audience was no longer listening to him. Their eyes had shifted. Their attention, their awe, their faith now belonged to his daughter. Evelyn remained in the center of the dance floor, her chest heaving, her scarred face illuminated by golden light. The applause still echoed in waves, not for Henry's empire, but for her defiance. For 7 years she had been hidden, silenced, framed as fragile. Tonight she had stood, spoken, and danced in front of hundreds and in front of millions more who now watched through glowing screens. Nathan stayed by her side, his hand steady at her waist, his presence quiet but unyielding. He asked for nothing. He claimed no credit. He was simply there, anchoring her as the storm of cameras, whispers, and revelations swirled. Evelyn glanced at him once, and in his calm eyes she found something she had thought lost forever: safety. At the edge of the room, Corbin Hayes laid the folder of evidence on a table, pages spread for all to see. The signatures, the memos, the warnings, all damning, all undeniable. Guests leaned closer, reading with horrified fascination. Investors whispered into phones, their words sharp, clipped, decisive. Lancaster Holdings was no longer a fortress. It was a burning tower collapsing under its own weight. Vivian Moore's live stream hit 1 million viewers in under an hour. Clips spread across platforms like wildfire, Nathan extending his hand, Evelyn stepping forward, Henry's confessions spilling from his own mouth. Headlines began to appear even before the gala ended. CEO's daughter defies father in scandalous dance. Henry Lancaster caught admitting to deadly negligence. From shame to strength, Evelyn Lancaster breaks. Silence. Henry saw the future unraveling in real time. He reached for allies but found none. Serena Blake, the ever-loyal COO, stood apart now, her expression cold, professional, already calculating the company's survival without him. Dante Cooper avoided his gaze, his phone glued to his hand as he crafted statements designed not to protect Henry, but to distance Lancaster Holdings from him. The empire he had built brick by brick, lie by lie, now fractured into pieces before his eyes. Evelyn. Henry tried again, his voice cracking as he stepped toward her. Please, you don't understand. Everything I did, everything was for you. For this family. Evelyn turned slowly, her face serene but resolute. No, she said, her voice carrying across the room with quiet strength. Everything you did was for yourself, and you lost us in the process. The words were simple, but they cut deeper than any revelation. For Henry, it was not just reputation collapsing. It was fatherhood. It was the last thread tying him to the daughter he had abandoned the night of the fire. He staggered back as though struck, his knees weakening beneath the weight of her truth. The music, steady and unrelenting, carried Evelyn and Nathan through the final movements of the waltz. Her steps grew lighter, her confidence stronger. By the end, she was no longer trembling. She was commanding. The last note soared and faded, leaving silence in its wake. Evelyn turned toward the crowd, toward the hundreds who had watched her rise from ashes. For 7 years she had hidden her face. Tonight she lifted her chin and let the light fall full upon her scars. "This is me," she said. Her voice did not tremble. "This is my face. These are my scars. I will not hide them. Not for you. Not for anyone. And I will dance." The room erupted again, louder than before. Applause thundered. Guests stood, some with tears streaming down their cheeks. Phones shook as viewers online typed frantically, "She's a hero. She's fire. She's truth." In the commotion, a small figure darted across the floor. Lily Carter, her braids bouncing, her smile uncontainable, ran to Evelyn and threw her arms around her waist. The innocence of the gesture softened the room, turning gasps into smiles, applause into cheers. Lily reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny music box, its brass surface gleaming under the lights. She wound the key and held it out. The melody that spilled forth was soft, imperfect, but achingly familiar. The same tune Evelyn had just danced to, the waltz reborn as a lullaby. "This was Mommy's," Lily said proudly, pressing it into Evelyn's hands. She said, "Music makes everything better. You can have it." Evelyn sank to her knees, her scarred cheek brushing against Lily's smooth one. The contrast should have been jarring. Instead, it was beautiful. Proof that scars and innocence, grief and hope could exist side by side. Evelyn accepted the music box with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking not from pain but from healing. The cameras captured it all, the moment that would define not just her, but everyone watching. Within hours, headlines shifted from scandal to symbol. Evelyn Lancaster was no longer the daughter her father hid. She was the face of resilience, of survival, of beauty that defied perfection. Henry stood alone, watching his empire disintegrate while the world embraced his daughter. For once he had no words. The microphone hung useless at his side. The applause was not his. The story was no longer his to control. And as the night drew to its close, Evelyn rose, the music box clutched against her heart. She looked at Nathan, at Lily, at the sea of witnesses who had seen her scars and chosen to celebrate them. She smiled, not perfectly, but truly. For the first time in 7 years, the ghost had become flesh again. She was not her father's shame. She was her own beginning. Evelyn had stepped into the light, not to reclaim who she once was, but to reveal who she had become. No longer her father's secret, no longer society's whisper. She was a woman who danced on her own terms. And in her courage, she gave the world a new definition of strength. One written not in perfection, but in survival. Not in hiding, but in choosing to be seen. The music box wound down, its final note fading into the quiet. Yet the melody lingered, carried in the hearts of everyone who witnessed her rise. A reminder that scars are not the end of the story. They are proof the story continued. Proof that broken things can still create beauty when they refuse to disappear. Fairy tales promise happily ever after. But this was not a fairy tale. This was something greater. The beginning of truly ever after, authentic, unhidden, unashamed, scars included, shame excluded. If this story moved you, let it remind you. Strength isn't about being flawless, it's about being fearless enough to be seen. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that turn scars into strength.